Hey guys, this will be video 8 for the how to design build a 50s era custom Explorer and a replica. And I'm going to focus just on the neck and neck construction. And we already talked about the layout and preparation for the rough out enough to really drive that home. And obviously it applied to the neck as well. So after you do get it roughed out, you're monitoring it, but then you've got to follow a certain order of operations to really make the job as easy as possible, but also as safe as possible, so you don't make any mistakes. So don't devote all your attention to making the headstock beautiful, only to be to have a lot of work left to do down here and run the risk of creating some damage. So I like to leave them really rough when I'm beginning to really process through the job. That's actually still the outside of the rough milled board. Now I did taper this one on this side here just because I was trying to preserve as much of the wood as possible, but unfortunately there just wasn't really anything left to the rest of the board wasn't very usable. So anyway, and you might be looking at that going, good grief, what in the world is going on? So let's address that elephant in the room right there, because I spent a day and a half trying to come up with my own creation and my own design, my own ideas. And again, I've made the statement that we must be copying them for a reason, because they're not copying us. But the design, and I'm only going to spend enough time with this to let you know that this is exactly how it was built in the 50s. If this being the neck, obviously the truss cover defines exactly where we are in the job. Imagine this line right here and this line right here basically being, if you looked at it from the end, they might have had a whole bunch of, what would this be, 2 3/16 of an inch wide, 2 1/4 inch wide little sticks that were 2 inches tall. And then it allowed them to just really rock it through the build. Whereas I initially started out with this whole idea of, I was going to consider, just doing the whole headstock out of one big piece. Now that is the board right there. It actually is up here. We'll talk about this stuff in a little while, but that was the billet right there. But I realized, wow, they were exactly right, because by pitching this, you get a better grain orientation. I'm going to stop. We'll talk about that stuff later. But they literally, with this design right here, made a ton of sense how they did it. They didn't do it because the boards they had were too short. They could have carried this all the way through and all the way to the end. But when you're looking at the end grain of this particular wood, and even mahogany, it's not very attractive when you get to the end grain. If you get too much end grain showing on that steep of a pitch, you're going to get real blotchy discoloration. So what they did is they come in with, where's the board? It's not nearly this big, but just humor me. It would be milled out of this, but when they cut that angle up on the top, that line right there up on the top, then they come in and glue this across the top like that. Okay, and what does that do? It produces a beautiful, beautiful, consistent color in the end grain. And now, obviously, it's much smaller than that, as you can imagine, but rather than seeing, something going on crazy, or let's say you had a joint right here where there was some sort of join, and this figure was going off on, this growth ring was going off crazy here, and this one was going off crazy that way. Even the untrained eye would look at that and go, "Ew, that's really unsightly." But the untrained eye looks at that right there, and they see beauty. And we'll cross that bridge later on, how I'm going to do that joinery. But I didn't even really want to make a video, but I knew that it was going to be really difficult for me to just sit here for 2 or 3 days building this neck, thinking, oh man, I need to be sharing this information and that information and what this company was thinking back in the 50s when they were even considering this build. And I kind of see exactly why they probably discontinued doing this, because this is insanely labor intensive and you truly run the risk of messing up by gluing on, I call these ears, by gluing on an ear here or an ear here that just in the slightest little bit is from a different tree. It's from a different board. It's got different coloration. Because keep in mind, back in the 50s, everything about even the furniture and the architectural elements in a home and things like that, they were going for a real blonde look, a very natural light colored wood. It was just very, and I'm not sure if Frank Lloyd Wright had anything to do with that from the earlier years, but because they were working with a lot of birch and maples from America and things like that. So anyway, the last thing they wanted was to have this beautiful blonde guitar, and then all of a sudden it turns, hardcore strawberry red or or mahogany at that, or any sort of darkness. They just weren't doing any dark woods. The dark woods didn't come around until the 70s. Okay, so that's the original design, where you add the ear lower down here, and you can even kind of see where I did not highlight that with yellow. What they probably would have done was glued this ear on first, this lower ear, and then they would have determined based on different variables whether they cut this up here or whether they went ahead and cut it all the way down. Because if they might have had one board that was really wide and went all the way up to that point right there, well, then there's no sense in cutting all that off. That they might have done this right here. Okay, so when you're building your guitar, just think along those lines of how do you want to build it? In other words, as I've said, I'm not going to build your guitar. I can't build your guitar because I'm not there looking at what's on your table. So on that note, what do we do? As I already mentioned, let me just grab the drops and we'll just look at everything as I was processing through it. I can't remember now. I think that might have been, I can't remember. Yeah, I think, yeah, it was. That was the board, okay? And then it went down long, and I'm having to make this determination, okay, I got to start drawing this neck from the top and from the side profile. And I hope I don't forget to talk about that. But I had, this is what I had going on, base to base. Okay. I had this right here, and that right there. Okay, yeah, let me grab it. It's still on the table saw. This may seem chaotic, but this is really important. Okay, so there's the table saw. But all this was done on the table saw. Okay, so that would have been the board. And originally, I just did that long curve to make certain that I could make my determination as to where I, cut that out. I wasn't sure. So when you're sitting there looking at that right there, plus you're looking at all of this lumber up here, I really took the time to think through, how do you do this and do it differently from how they did it here? So I'll say all that to say this. That was the best solution, because everything about this right here would have shown. It would have shown this cut going down on an angle, and it would have looked really weird. And then even at the bottom, the likelihood that the stain would remain consistent, it would have not. So what I did is I roughed that piece out with the intention of possibly coming over here Okay, so I dropped that. I dropped that off. And then see this was up here, and I'm sorry, I'm sorry for the idiocy if there is any such thing when you're trying to do a video like this. But I knew that my best chance of getting a beautiful transition from the neck to this ear was this right here. You know, in other words, pivoting. Let me just put that down. In other words, this was the neck. So I was thinking of it, and I'll deal with this stuff later. I was trying to figure out how to do it, and I hope that's on the camera. That's going to be awful if I'm not even on the camera. But I was dealing with this whole idea. I realized, okay, I know for a fact that's what I'm going to do. And keep in mind, this would have still been way up here, not like that. And I thought, well, that will allow me a platform by which to cut all this off. I did not do it that way because I've got a special jig that I've built that allows me to take a big block of wood like that right there and cut this and cut that and not cut this and not cut that. We'll talk about that in a little while because you just do it on a table saw. It's not, you don't have to have a $3,000 bandsaw in order to pull this off. Every bit of this can be done with a basic table saw. Okay. So there's my guitar beginning to materialize, my headstock. And so I know that I'm going to pivot there. So that's covered. But now I've got this whole end grain issue to deal with up here and obviously on the back as well. Okay, so let me get this stuff off the table because I don't need this anymore. But the next thing I began to realize was I don't need this up here because the fact that this headstock does not go out straight and flare out like a big jazz guitar. Everything about this guitar, it tapers. I mean, it just dives down. The only thing that was truly important was this down. Well, it's all important, but this was far more important. And when you flip the guitar over, looking at this end grain is going to be absolutely stunning. Why? Because this is literally this grew right next to everything in my left hand grew, you know, together. So by just pitching it this way, the coloration on the back will be positively just beautiful. And I imagine there's a very strong possibility you won't even see it. Why? Because of the Korina. It's just beautiful that way. Now this will be black up here, okay? And I'm gonna stop talking about that, but I'm just gonna briefly cover this to realize I didn't need that. I don't need all that crazy mass because let me put it, because this is what I was processing through. See, here's the importance of having this clear, because now it's helping you engineer your job just the same way that I used the body template to help me lay out in preparation for the rough out. Okay, let me get this right because it's not that far down. I don't want you guys thinking that I've tried to machine it right to the finish line. I'm about a 1/16 of an inch longer than it needs to be, actually a little bit more than that. So that would be the end of the guitar, and keep in mind, even that's still going to get cut off. So even if I miss the target, it don't matter. It's going to get cut off anyway. Why? Because it's going to get, you know, a piece right here roughed out. And I'm going to make certain that I cover this again. This came from this location right here. So when this goes over here and goes on an angle, you see what I did? I didn't just grab it up and go, well, it's thinner this way, put it on that way. No, that would be a huge mistake because now you've turned it on a 90-degree. I've literally taken it out of the tree from this location right here. I'm going to take it over here, and then I'm going to take it in wherever I need. And if I have to pitch it the way Gibson pitched it, then I'll pitch it. But that way, when you're looking at the end grain, the side grain, and all that jazz, it'll be beautiful and as clear as possible. It wouldn't be a problem if you came in and did this. Either one of those will be beautiful. But why do this when this is how it grew? When this is how it grew? in the natural. Okay, that ought to make perfect sense, even though it's probably a little long-winded. Let me check the time. Yeah, 15 minutes, but a lot of information there. So just if you don't understand what it is I'm talking about, just realize that I changed gears. I attempted to do my own design, and then I realized, wow, that's by far is the best approach. So it's amazing, even the fact that this was kind of like a prototype guitar that they built. They came right out of the gate with the best solution on the front end. Okay, so now the next thing would be, and some people might be thinking, because even me personally, I would have always thought, oh man, that's going to kill the tone. It's going to this. It's going to be weak. Everything about it's going to be a mistake. But the more I built, and I'm talking about the way I was 15 to 20 years ago, or actually more like 20, 25 years ago. And within about 3 to 5 years of building guitars, I realized, oh, wow, it's amazing how forgiving this stuff is. And it's also amazing how strong the tight bond glue is and does not affect the tone. It's incredible. So, because everyone knows that the Explorer is probably sheer tonal bliss. And look at that headstock. It's all, I'm not going to say it's butchered up because it's not butchered up, but you would look at it and go, man, it's a 3-piece headstock all glued together, and you still get those kind of tones. Well, yeah, it lets you know that as long as the luthier work or the repair work is really high quality, you're going to get a phenomenal looking and phenomenal sounding instrument. Okay. Another thing about this little acrylic jig, I'll be able to use it as a gluing template. When I'll clamp this in place, and then I'll have some. I'll probably put some wax on it, so I don't risk getting the levels off. And then I'll glue this with tight bond. Okay, and I'll be able to do gentle clamping on the surface, and then all of my extreme clamping from, like a 70-degree angle and then straight. I'll talk about that stuff later, but nonetheless, you can use that to help you level up the surface. Oh yeah, this is pretty important. And you look at it on the back, it's proud. It's about 1/8 of an inch thick. And then, sorry about that. That was probably pretty loud. And then after it's all said and done, then I'll come in and machine all this down. Oh, I'm glad I went off the cuff there. I'll segue into those ears, everything about these ears. Let me go ahead and talk about this ear briefly as well. And I'll try to remember to mention that I'll just go ahead and do this. This is what it's going to look like when it's glued together. It will literally look like just, a guitar neck coming together. And most people would never realize that they're so ugly, and they look like you're building a wagon handle or something, or a platform. And then if you do a really good job doing all your color matching, grain orientation, growth rings, and all that jazz. Once you can already see how that one right there, the color is already virtually identical. And it's just going to fade in, and you'll never even know it. And then, so after it's glued up, I'll be planing off this back. Why? Because this is a finished surface. That was the most important thing, getting that perfectly true and perfectly level. And 99% of the time, when you rough out a neck like this, they have a tendency to want to just kind of start turning down a little. If they start twisting, then I'd say can that thing, because it's going to be a nightmare trying to get it under control. And it might twist and it might revert, but I've never seen a guitar issue materialize after 2 or 3 days. As soon as I rough this out of a board, whatever it's going to do, it's going to do it pretty much immediately, if not within an hour. Okay, so when I roughed this out, all it did was exactly what this neck did, exactly what that neck did, exactly what the other 20 necks have done. It has a tendency to move this way a little bit. So you have to come in and you have to not plane it, I just level it a little bit. And I'm going to stop talking about this because I won't be able to explain it in a fashion, in a way that would make sense. But you just kind of verify, well, you watch it first to see if it's going to revert back. But I'll just go ahead and tell you, they don't ever revert back. And when I say movement, it dropped about a 16th of an inch. When I had the straight edge up here, it was so close that I could have just left it. Okay, I could have left it and then put the truss rod in, and then put a little bit of forward bend in the truss rod. But I don't do stuff like that. I want this neck true, so much so that you could build it without a truss rod. If it was going on a classical guitar, I wouldn't do that on a steel string guitar. But you probably would be better to build this solid with just the fretboard as a classical guitar, and then go from there. But nonetheless, the next move was to verify that was good, and it was exactly where I wanted it. I did just about 15 minutes of leveling a little bit, and then made sure it was true, and then I had already roughed it out. I jumped the gun there a little bit. I'm not going to talk about how I cut that out because there's just really not time. But where I am going with this, I'm going to finish talking about what it was I brought, why I brought this up anyway. This is finished. This thickness here, this is already tapered per the client's request at a certain thickness of the neck that he wanted. He wants a fairly fast, thinner 60s profile neck. So that's exactly what I built. It's going to be 7/8 of an inch right here, and it's going to be exactly 1 inch. Where's the 12th fret? Right there. Right here, it's 1 inch. So that's a pretty fast 60s neck, or like a 335 as well. So I went ahead and got that perfectly true and perfectly finished. Even this right here, I've got my thickness that I want here and my thickness that I want out here, so that now when I'm building this headstock, I'm following the upper surface. And I wanted to tell you what it was, my reasoning behind that, but I was afraid that if I didn't go through the operations and let you know that what you're looking at is the finished neck as far as the center line goes. Even the heel, that's within about 1/16 of an inch of the finished heel in the center, okay, down the center of the neck. The thicknesses, this is finished. That is the top of the the lower. I call this the lower, and obviously then the fretboard. I don't call this the neck in its entirety. I don't consider it a neck until you got the fretboard on there. But now that I've got this perfectly flat, true cut, because see, I was working off of a 90-degree or perpendicular to the center line, and it's pretty. I'm going to say it's pretty easy to get this off. It's real easy to just machine that off. But again, the jig that I designed that holds this and I cut this, believe it or not, I cut that with a table saw. And my table saw is trued up so perfect that it, as soon as I come through the line, and I don't mean multiple passes, it's a one pass cut. And it's so cool to watch it as it's coming out of the wood, as I showed earlier. And then the pencil line is, see, you got your pencil line mark right there, and when it comes out, you see the blade just the pencil line just disappears. Why do you want the pencil line to disappear? Because you're going to be putting a maple veneer over the top of it as the headstock face. So a long way around saying that once I'm gluing these items up, if that were a perfectly true engineered surface, and let's say that's where it was supposed to be, it's not. I think it's probably about right there. See how I've got my arrows, and that arrow, all I have to do now is look at my arrows. That tells me the direction, and it also tells me the top. So that's what it's going to look like. I'm sorry, this is hard to do on camera. That should be in the camera. Once it's glued up, and that's going to happen tonight. Okay, that's what it's going to look like. It's going to be beautiful on the other side, and within just a 64th of an inch of just one simple pass. And in other words, you wouldn't want to make it beautiful on the back and then run the risk of effing up the front. Okay, so let's talk about the next thing. Before we glue these on, let's just keep these directional. And if you don't trust yourself, maybe come up here and do some sort of design or with arrows and stuff like that. And trust me, there's nothing wrong with that, because if you got two little sticks like this that you're gluing one stick on this side and one stick on that side, again, we call them ears. Like if you were doing your traditional 3x3 guitar, well, then you better put an arrow on there so that you don't run the risk of doing this crap right here. If that one was intended, well, exactly like it is, it's intended to go right there, but it would be real easy to end up, picking it up and going, oh yeah, that's beautiful, that's perfect, I'll put it right there. And then then after you machine the neck, then you look at it and then the grains are wrong. Okay, so when you're roughing out the material, you're making very very intentional cuts and drops and reliefs and stuff like that, because you know how you're going to be putting the tree back together. In essence, that's what you're doing. You're taking a board that's intact, you're cutting it apart, and you're putting it back together in such a way that you'll be able to finish out a headstock. Okay, so the next thing, now that you've got that marked and you know how you're going to use it, rather than going ahead and gluing all that stuff up on there, now it's time to put the truss rod in. Okay, and that's what I meant by this is finished. I don't need to cover that anymore, and I don't even really think there's any reason to talk about these templates. So let me just get this off the table. And try to keep the table as clean as possible and non-chaotic. Again, I did use the Stuart McDonald templates as a little bit of reference, but for the most part, just to do this right here, just to kind of gauge the difference between pitches and things like that, and locate. I already engineered it, I already know, but you could use a template like that to help you engineer it. But check the time, 27 minutes. I would pause, but I'm just going to keep rocking and rolling here, because what would be the next operation? You could go ahead and cut the tenon, which I typically do not. I like to go ahead and put my truss rod in, and let's talk about we'll talk about it on this side. And this is one of the reasons why I didn't go ahead and glue that ear on. See, I could have glued all this stuff on about 3 hours ago, but I was doing all this machine work so that I could do another video tonight, and then it would be really easy to lay this up here and show you the cross, kind of like a cross-section view. Let me just put it in place. Like a cross-section view of the neck with the truss rod in it. Okay, now these truss rods are designed to be brought up perfectly flush. There's nothing wrong with that at all. Nothing wrong with that at all. And then what would happen, you would come in with your fretboard. Just imagine we're looking at the center line of the neck over here, and then that plastic coating is visible. There's nothing wrong with leaving that exposed and then gluing your fretboard right atop that, just like that right there. This should be a great video. I would have loved to have had a video like this when I first started building, because it would have helped me envision what's going on inside that neck. But I don't do it that way. I do it this way. I've always done it this way, and this is the way Robert Benedetto built them. It's the way Gibson built them. Gretsch probably as well. They were putting the bowed truss rod in, and then they were putting a fillet down in that routing channel in order to fill it in. And what did it do? I think most importantly, it reconnected the neck that had an enormous route down the middle. You basically cut the neck completely in half. And then rather than just leaving that disconnected, even though you're going to be gluing this on, I think it's so much nicer to come in with the fillet, and I always epoxy these in. Do not glue these in with Titebond. I know it would be strong enough, but I much prefer to have the epoxy in there, because that fillet is about, it's a little bit over. It's probably about it. I don't think it's going to be 3/32 of an inch. I know it's not an eighth, but yeah, it may be. It's going to be closer to an eighth than it is to a 16th. I don't know what the metric would be. Does it have to be? Again, as I said, it doesn't even have to be there. But I just like it because the primary reason is now I know that when I glue my fretboard down, I have 100% wood to wood. And this will give you an idea of, this is like 70s, early 80s, construction. I'm not impressed at all. And I'll just leave it at that. That's just it is what it is. It's beautiful. It looks great on the surface, and what's amazing is they sound incredible as well. But when I restored Rick's guitar, that ain't what we did. Okay, and Rick's guitar turned out phenomenal from a tonal standpoint and a construction standpoint because I had a 100% wood surface here in order to glue the fretboard down to, which is exactly how this will be. So let me check the time. 31 minutes. I'm just going to keep talking. So if you're bored, I can see why. Check out if you need to. But I think if the guys are out there that are really about to build a guitar neck, this is some extremely valuable information. Okay, this could be cut on a table saw. It'd be real easy to cut on a table saw. Why? Because you left that side straight. Okay, and you verify it by measuring off the center over to this edge and the center over to that edge. And mine is it's slightly over 1 1/8 of an inch. And we won't go in there, but just do the math. It could have been 1 3/32, and that would have been the threshold, but not 1 3/32 if it looked like that. Why? Because that's the finished guitar, okay, at the 19th fret. So the fact that you've got that straight edge right there, you could crank up your table saw and just cut a channel right down the middle, and it would be square on the sides and square on the bottom, and it would work fine. You could just put a little, put the truss rod in up here, and then you put a little fillet in back there, and you're in good shape. I don't do things that way because I look at exactly what it is I'm installing, and I have a radiused bottom and a flat top. So I intentionally go in with the correct bit. I'm going to turn this upside down. We're looking at it from the back, but I come in and I run the router with the 1/4 inch round nose just down to that the bottom. Therefore, the bottom of my channel is perfectly radiused and perfectly cradles this truss rod and does not risk any sort of binding or kicking, or as it's trying to be used to either forward relief or back relief, it doesn't have to jump into a corner first and then start working. Because if your truss rod channel is too big, too wide, too whatever, and that baby jumps over in a corner, well, guess what's going to happen when you start tightening that up? It's going to twist your neck. That truss rod has got to be perfectly true in the neck. And you might think, well, everybody knows that. Well, everybody does now that's watching this video, but you have to keep in mind, when I first started building 30 years ago, I didn't know that. I didn't even really know how the truss rod worked. So that's my channel. And I won't be back here, but I'm just showing you roughly where it'll be in that location right there as far as depth. Because once this truss rod goes in, the top of my truss rod is going to be dropped down in the body of this lower about almost 1/8 of an inch, or over a 16th or so. Yeah, definitely over a 16th. It's closer to 1/8, as I mentioned. I'm going to visit that again. So then you got that in place, and then you're able to come in and epoxy or fill it in. Okay. So there's a little bit more to it than just routing it. And I'm sorry, I jumped straight from the table saw, which would have been okay as long as you kept it nice and tight, but you would have just had a square bottom and potentially lose a little bit of tone. So mine with the radius bottom up to this point, once you get up to this point, it drops down a little bit in two different steps. So you have to step up to a 3/8 of an inch radius bit down here. I'm sorry, let's turn it over. Okay, so that's the guitar. Now let's turn it over. Okay, in other words, if it's on the router table, that's sticking up out of the router table. Now I've got to raise this router bit up a little bit in order to make it a little bit deeper out here. I'm gonna stop because anybody that's done router work, they already kind of see exactly how, you know, this is done. It's as simple as if you have a router table, you can just throw a stick up there and just, you know, put a clamp on both ends and then come in and look at these three different bits. Start out with that little bit first. Okay, I'm gonna do some cowboy vocational work here. You would start out with this little bitty one and start easing up to it back there, and make certain that you're hitting the center as you're locating this point. And if you're off a little bit, it's no big deal because you're going to be coming in with a 3/8 inch up here anyway. And once you find the center with this doesn't move. Make sure it stays intact because you just identified where this board needs to be in order for that alignment 1/8 inch bit to find the center. Now you transition over to that bit and you just slowly ease up till you get the channel. Okay, and then you keep raising this bit until you get the appropriate depth that you want. And then once you get that appropriate depth, then move over to this bit and ease your way up. And this is where you're going to want to have a mark on it, a stop mark. So let's say that this was your router table and you're standing over there pushing in this direction and that's coming up out of the table. You're going to want to have some sort of identification over here that lets you know when you need to stop, pushing. Actually, the same thing back here. And guess what that is? That little indication right there. I already know that I don't have to put it on the other side. It is on the other side, but I only have to put it on this side because I'm right-handed. And that's where I will be going all the way back to that point right there and stopping. And that's where my truss channel will start. And there's the little stop point. And it's very important that when you are doing this, that when you're standing there, this is what you need to see. Because that router bit is turning this way, and as soon as you push this up, it's going to want to push it into the fence. If you had your fence over here, it just ain't going to work, because as you come up to it, as soon as you kiss it, it's going to want to pull your neck away from it. Okay, that ought to make perfect sense to even to the newbies to routing. So again, that's what you're going to want to see. And it'll be perfectly centered based on this straight edge. Okay, if this one is 1 1/8 of an inch from here to here, what do you think the center of that router bit should be from here to here? Identical. Okay, and if it's not, if you're off a little bit, if there's something kooky about it, at least this little bit right here will help you determine where the true center is. Okay. So a lot of information there, a lot of just general information, but everybody can crank up a router and try to impress the YouTube crowd, but very few people take the time to stop and talk about how do you take a near priceless board and work your way all the way to the finish line and not make any mistakes. That's what I'm trying to do with my video series, where I'm helping people think for themselves more so than me build the guitar for you. And then, that's basically what you're going to have by the time it's all said and done. And then, you'll have your truss, your truss rod. It'll be stopping probably about right there, somewhere there. And the thing is, you could put it back a little bit deeper. The last thing, it'd be better for it to be a little bit deeper in here than further out, because you wouldn't be able to get the truss rod cover on it. So, all right, nothing very attractive to end with. I'll just bring the body over, put that, and then we'll talk about. Oh yeah, could hide a multitude of sins with some sort of stinger, but I'm not there yet. I kind of have an idea of what we could do, but again, I'm not there yet. But we'll let that marinate a little bit, and I will end the video right there. I'll pick up that piece in a little while. If you got any questions or comments, let me know. I hate that it was so long-winded and it wasn't organized, but I think we covered a lot of really good ground. So the next time I fire up the camera, there will be a headstock on here, finished, very close to finished. There'll be a truss rod in, and it will have that fillet down there. And basically, it's going to look virtually identical to that right there, except it'll be an Explorer headstock. Okay, 17 degrees for the V, 14 degrees for the Explorer. Make note of that, because that is way too much for that droopy headstock that goes off to the side. So I'll end the video there. Appreciate you guys checking in, and I'll see you in the next video.